Hi guys, give me literally 2 seconds before you click off this video. There's something really important that you're all going to want to know about the driver station this year. So I was at week 0, and basically the driver station this year, I have it up on the screen here. Going to week 0 and looking at the actual driver station and seeing how it played, one of the biggest things I noticed, and I think everybody noticed this year, was this little sponsor panel here, which seems pretty harmless, but it is such a hindrance to your vision. This is essentially an extra, I don't know how tall this is, but it felt like 5 or 6 inches that is blocking you off from an already really hard to see front of your driver station, right? Every year, this is normally a challenge where game pieces get stuck against your driver station wall. It's normally not that big of an issue because in games where it really matters, like say 2024, where it's stuck up against your wall, you're able to just bend over, and because there was none of the sponsor panel before, you could just look down. That is not the case this year. This 5-inch panel means that even if you're like bending your head over, there's fuel that can be here, and you're bending your head over the entire way, and you cannot see it. So just to let everybody know, this panel is an actual issue for when you're going to be looking for fuel throughout the field. And as you'll see in the finals matches I'm about to show you, there's going to be a lot of fuel piled up against these walls. So that is an issue that you're going to want to take action against before your first competition, whether that be a camera, a mirror of some sort, any way to look down at the vision directly in front of your driver station, as well as along the entire driver station wall. You're going to want something to solve that challenge however you want to do that. All right, let's get into the matches now. End up taking a look at. So these are going to be the final 1, 2, and the tiebreaker match, where Alliance 1 wins the first one, Alliance 2 wins the second one, and then Alliance 1 ends up taking the win at week 0. And let's see how they ended up pulling that off. So first off, I want to take a look at the auto setups that we have. So as we know in week 0, most people are coming in with a half-built robot. And because of that, when you have Alliance 1 and Alliance 2 third robots, however you want to describe that, the second pick of the Alliance, you'll end up with them playing more of a defense role because they often are like the 24th robot on the field. And in that case, a lot of the times, even like the 16th robot might not have like an intake or something. So a lot of the cases we can see that these robots are going to be much more favored to just playing defense. And I think Alliance 1 does this in the best way. I love their strategy, and we'll take a look at that as the match progresses. But keep that in mind for the auto setups that they're going to run, because the middle robots in both of these aren't going to have much of a role in auto, just because of the fact that it's so early that these teams haven't designed anything yet, right? So let's take a look at how these two alliances have really different ideas on what they want to do during auto. So first off, as soon as we press play, we're going to see that 4099 and 1768, that's who that is at the bottom, are both going to be gunning for the middle, right? And to contrast that, we have 6328, who does not want to touch the middle at all. And you can see that because of the fact that they can't actually pass through the trench with their giant size. And what they ended up doing was, the entire day, was they would just go through the bump. And we'll see how that affected them later on in teleop. But for auto, what it means is that their entire game plan was to just run up to all of the collected fuel in the human player station, go pick that up, come back and fire it in. Whereas Liger bots have, I think, one of my favorite autos of the day, which is where they shoot a little bit. And I think that we're going to end up seeing 1768 and 4909 style a lot more, where you don't bother shooting the first 8 preload before you go to the middle, because it does end up leaving the other alliance, as we can see in this case, 1768, 4909, ended up just taking the entirety of the fuel in the middle and just scattering it everywhere, meaning that now when we take a look at 2877s of auto, it's not going to be nearly as effective. And although they have a passing auto back to themselves, because of the fact that all the fuel that was supposed to be here is now displaced because of the fact that 1768, 4909 both ran through the middle, it means that their auto is now less effective. And this entire sequence of passing back to themselves for the start is now worthless for the teleop, even though it's a really good idea, because they spent that extra second or two to shoot in the start of their auto. And the 8 preloads aren't really all that much when it comes to the grand scale of things, because your hoppers are so big to where even if you are taking that 8 loss of points, you're going to end up making it back in the time that you use to collect fuel from the middle. So if we take a look at Ligerbot's auto, what it's supposed to do is basically just go through the middle, pass back everything, and keep passing back. And then what they do is, this is the part I love the most, is they're going to come back here and they're going to start firing as they walk into the depot area. And I love this because what otherwise I would have thought most robots would, or most alliances would have, is maybe your third robot tries to go to the depot. You send one robot directly to the middle to compete, and then this other robot, maybe it goes to the middle, maybe it goes to human player station. Either way, it's a little less efficient than just allowing your partner to just do this Ligerbot's auto where you do every single roll at once, and you also allow yourself to have a consistent stream of cargo, or fuel rather, feeding through yourself into the hub throughout the entirety of this auto period. And you can see it actually ends up making the difference, as even though 4909 and 1768 ended up being first to the fuel in the middle, Alliance 1 does end up winning auto here, and we'll see what the effects of that actually mean throughout the rest of this match, but you'll see it's pretty big when you do win auto, and auto is a really big contributor of who ends up winning this which match. So starting off, because of the fact that Alliance 1 won auto, we're going to have a 10-second grace period, you can see from the middle of the scoreboard here, and then Alliance 2 is going to have their active period. Now let's see what they do, and I think the immediate first thing to notice is 6328 immediately gets beached because they go over the bump. This is going to be a really common theme today. And it was throughout all of week 0, but oh my god, the amount of beaches that happened and partners that had to come and knock your other robots off of cargo was incredible. This is an actual design challenge of trying to figure out how to get yourself unbeached, because if you don't try to deal with it, and you can see here, right, Ligerbots as well also got beached. The 2 highest scoring robots on Alliance 1 were both beached during this period, and again, they're bailed out by the auto because winning that auto is so important, because now, even though they are both beached, and normally if they did lose auto, they'd have to have 2342 come over, knock them off, and then both of them off, which would take a significant portion of time, maybe like 5 or 6 seconds. And then after that, they'd have to go collect fuel still, go back and shoot it all in. And that's all time that's getting wasted because of the fact that you got beached. However, because they actually ended up winning auto, this isn't nearly as much of a disadvantage as you would have thought, as 2342 taking them off, right? And 2877 is still beached, by the way. But this, instead of 6028 being panicked to go back to their own side and start scoring and picking up fuel and start scoring, they're actually able to just be calm, collect all the fuel they want from the middle, start passing it back to themselves, and then they're also able to go knock 2877 so that they can be up and ready in time for their cycle of scoring. And so we can see 2877 essentially, because of the fact they tried to go over the bump, even though they can't go under the bump, right? Because they tried to go over the bump, they got beached for a full 25-second cycle, and that's the entire 25 seconds where the opponent is able to score freely and you're not doing anything to inhibit them. And so because of that, we ended up seeing Alliance 2 actually ended up getting 94 points because Phoenix wasn't able to play any defense at all, and then these guys were both beached, so they couldn't do a lot of that passing back to themselves, stealing the fuel that they wanted to do. And so we can see on the other side, Neshoba also gets beached and is getting played defense on, but because there's defense in the middle, they end up getting unbeached. And I think that this is where one of the interesting strategies comes in here of, do you want to go send your robot to play defense? Do you not want them to play defense? Do you want to just be a shuttle bot? Herding actually ended up being a really effective strategy compared to what I thought it would be. So we had robots like 5962 the entire day, which were basically just doing this little loop of, I'm going to go around my side, I'm going to try to angle myself in this orientation, push all the fuel I can towards the side, and then go ram it in, And it all ended up coming in a nice stream out this way for your scorer robot or whoever it may be to then pick up and then start collecting and putting it in your scoring area. So this herding strategy was really a lot more effective than I thought it would be. I think it can work if you end up breaking, right? You can still contribute to your alliance in a significant way offensively if you break just by being that herder robot. But I mean, it worked pretty solidly, and you could see that that's basically what Persevere here is doing, right? Instead of going to play defense on the opposing alliance's scoring time, they're just saying, okay, just go herd some balls for us, and you can see that's exactly what they're doing. I personally think that I would have had a third robot here go play defense on 6328, just because of the fact that I think that if you are a turret team, 4909 is a turret team. Neshoba does have a dual, I believe Neshoba has a dual flywheel system where they're able to shoot two at once, and it's just a hooded shooter, it's not actually a turret. But if you don't have a turret, this defense that you can play against these non-turret teams is really effective. We saw it in other matches as well, where just playing defense against a non-turreted team and just knocking them in the corner, and you'll see this as well when Phoenix goes over and plays defense on Alliance 2. But defense, at least early in the season, seems like it's going to be really effective just because allowing the opposing alliance to have a full hopper and just dump an entire hopper worth of points, especially when it's a hopper as big as 6328's, it's just not a feasible strategy. And we can see 2342 playing some pretty solid defense here, right? Just blocking 4909 from getting to their side with time to spare. And they go back and they say, well, we see that 4909 is getting blocked, right? And we're going to make the choice of, instead of keeping 4909 out of the zone, we're going to go and mess up 1768 because, again, they don't have a turret. They have just a non-moving flywheel. And you can see that it actually does end up forcing 1768 to miss some of their shots. And I think more, rather than missing a lot of their shots, right, maybe 2342 ends up making 1768 miss some shots. But I think the bigger thing here isn't that they're missing shots. It's that you've now messed up the orientation that 1768 is in that they'd like to collect from. I think this especially applies to teams that are going for dual intakes or dual shooters or triple shooters, where they have a crazy amount of throughput, but they don't have the hopper to back that up. If you're able to play defense on them, and you don't even have to stop the scoring per se, but just knock them in a configuration where now we can see 1768 isn't in a position where they can just go easily turn, pick up a bunch more cargo, fuel, and then go run back and dump it all in. You've essentially just wasted at least like 5 or 6 seconds of time just by knocking them out of orientation, and you don't even have to play hard defense on them, and you can go use your resources as a defender on the other robot. This does only apply to robots that are doing like a non-turret design, but I think that's going to be the main difference of turret versus non-turret, is going to be just, are you going to play defense on them? Because if you're not playing defense on a robot that has literally just 6328, right? If you're not playing defense on 6328 where they have a giant intake and a giant hopper and a giant amount of balls they can shoot at once, I don't think that you can win as a turret robot. And there's going to be some strategy stuff that you're going to have to create in order to give yourself an advantage in that situation. I think that's what makes this game so interesting, is just that the idea that happens. And we can see 2342 comes over again, knocks them up, and literally just by pushing them a little bit, 1768 became beached and has to now struggle to get themselves out off of the cargo fuel, and then is losing time cycling because of that. And then on the other side, we see 6328, 2077 both set themselves up for success. They spent the time that Alliance 2 was scoring in just collecting as much fuel as possible. And now, because there's no real defense on them, 6328 is able to just get away with dumping an entire hopper's worth of fuel just into the hub. And we can see that they're also doing this, like, there's not as much fuel on their side because of the fact that, there's not, the game hasn't been refined yet, right? Robots are still at a week 0 level. But if this was like a week 2, week 3 level, then I think that if you leave 6328 like this, and they do the little shimmying along looking for cargo as they're shooting, especially with a robot where you have an adjustable hood and you can adjust that angle as you're moving, I think that that's could lead to essentially not an infinite cycle of scoring, obviously, but a cycle of scoring where you're able to get like 1.5 times your hopper worth of cargo scored without ever having to actually go hunt for cargo because it's just all sitting there for you. And we can see 2877 also doing the same thing, right? Trying to make a sweeping motion across. And they just get a bunch of cargo. And this is where I think the biggest advantage of winning auto comes in. So let's take a look at 6328 here and 2877. They have essentially already gone during their entire scoring period. They went and collected more cargo. And because of the fact that it's now their turn to score, they're already putting that in. And now 6328 has gone and collected an extra hopper worth of cargo, of fuel on their own side. And they're now, because it's going from their period to everyone's period, is able to continuously score this entire time while also just hunting for cargo. Like, they didn't have to change their objective at all. They didn't have to move across the field. They didn't have to do any of that. I think that's one of the main reasons why we see teams like alliances like 1768 499 choosing not to play defense, is because you spend your entire time running across the field, right? You're spending essentially 25 seconds a match just going from end to end because you need to get from one place to another because you just get flipped around so easily. I think that might also contribute to why they chose not to play defense in this match. But if we go back a sec, I do want to point out this incredible play by Phoenix, I believe. Yeah, Phoenix is the one who does this. Very heads-up play by them. Sees that there's a pileup of cargo here, which, if you watched week 0 in the live stream, you can see, this does not happen often, right? I know that it feels like there should be a lot of cargo on the field, but when I was watching today, it did feel like I saw robots being starved for fuel, which is really interesting to me because there's so much fuel on the field, and yet you can still feel that robots are trying to go for that going across perhaps and just picking up and scoring and keeping that continuous flow. And it's just not possible because you don't have the passing throughput to be able to do that. However, when you have a team like Phoenix who's really heads up about this play and is able to just knock all of that fuel into their own area for 6328 to go and collect, and we already see that there's a huge difference in scoring here, but I mean, just being able to spend the last 10 seconds of your entire match just putting cargo in from your gigantic hopper, like, even though 1768, 499 have this like crazy amount of fuel here, and again, right, when they talked about the walls here, this does block off a lot of your vision. I would not be surprised if they did not see like at least a row or two of these fuel because of that weird angle that has now become of the driver station. But even though you have all of this fuel that you can try to collect, there's just not enough time because you had to keep switching what you were doing and you weren't able to have that consistent minute, essentially, of just, we are now scoring for an entire minute. We know what we're doing for the rest of the match, and we're not going to switch our roles because of that and waste time on that. So, ends up going to Alliance 1 at the end of this. And yeah, no one was really climbing, I think, at all throughout this event. I think you'll see climbing happen a lot more in the actual qual matches, but not really during endgame because the climb isn't really worth it unless you're doing it really fast, which I didn't see anybody doing it at a crazy pace other than, I think, 190, who had a really, really interesting climb where they flipped their bumpers up to try to get that L3 climb going. But the climb seemed like much more of a qual match thing rather than an endgame thing. playoffs thing, and in playoffs it seemed like it was much better to just spend your time, that 10 seconds or however long it would take to climb, just go hunt for an extra hopper worth of fuel and just start dumping that in and see how many points you can score. All right, so let's take a look at what Alliance 2 did now to try to shift up the strategy and how they actually ended up taking Final 2 over Alliance 1. All right, guys, so here is finals match number 2. So this one does end up being tainted a bit by the fact that 6328 and Ligerbots do end up breaking during this match. However, 1768 and 4909 put up a really, really high score even through that. So I think it is worth watching just to look at what 1768 and 4909 do so well at scoring, because they put up a really high number here, and I do want to see how that happens. So the first thing to note, these guys do end up switching their autos after the last one, which I think is in response to the way Ligerbots is doing their auto, or maybe they just didn't like the way that their auto was positioned. Either way, when we take a look at their auto, they still both are running for the middle at the same time, but instead we see that 768 goes from the other side of the field, and 4909 takes the close side to us. I think this might be due to the way that they want to set up the field, because maybe they want a lot of their extra fuel to end up landing in this area because 4909 is passing it back versus 1768 who's actually just shuttling it back. But whatever reason it may be, they do end up switching it, and the result is still the same for 2877, where they're left with a lot less fuel than they normally would be. However, as you can see, their intake does end up breaking here, and so even though they do end up in a scenario where maybe they can get like 30 fuel back during this auto period and potentially win auto with that, they end up where they can't collect any of it and they can't really shoot at all because of that. And it's only 6328 that ends up being able to put anything in during auto, and this leads to Alliance 2 actually winning the auto period here because of that breakage in 2877's intake. So let's take a look at what they do with this advantage now, because now they don't have to deal with being the first one to score. And immediately we can see that they're already starting to pass back themselves, right? 1768 was passing back themselves, and 4909 also passing back themselves. And you can see how being the first ones up does force you to go fast, right? Before, 6328 was able to get beached here, 2877 was able to get beached here and not suffer really a lot of punishment for that getting beached because they weren't on their scoring cycle. However, if they were to get beached here, right, obviously they'd be really, really bad because they have to be scoring during this period. Otherwise, you're down an entire 25 seconds worth of scoring, which is basically, you can't come back from that. Right, so 6328, you can see, immediately just grabs whatever they can instead of trying to fill their hopper to the brim like they normally do, and just runs over and just starts trying to pile in as many points as possible. What I think is interesting here is what 2877 and Phoenix do in terms of defense, right? So they're playing defense during their offensive period because obviously, right, 2342 can't really score, 2077 can't score because they have a broken intake. So what they end up doing is they're trying to defend the passing from this area just by knocking the passers back. And the reason that they're choosing 1768 to defend instead of someone like 4909 is because of the fact that 4909 has a turret, and defending passing back to yourself when you have a turret isn't really all that effective because the turret will just adjust for all of that movement that you're going to knock them anyways. Whereas in a shooter that's not moving, that knock actually does end up helping, as you can see that 1768's shots actually do end up flying a little bit wayward because of that. And you can see, right, 2342 tries pushing 4909 a little bit, but it doesn't really matter just because of the fact that they have a turret. They can adjust, and wherever they go, it doesn't really matter because it's all just going to end up in the same general location anyways, just because the fact the turret will adjust for it. And this match is kind of a wash at this point because if we look at the scores, with Alliance 2 coming up on their scoring cycle, because of the fact 6328 was rushed from that auto, because of the fact that they don't have 2877 also putting up numbers in telly with them, this kind of ends up just not being comebackable as a lead, because what you essentially need is to play such good defense that Alliance 2 only scores 12 of the fuel in their entire scoring period to even this up. And with teams like 1768 and 49 just is not possible. Even with some pretty good defense over here from 2342 and Ligerbots, right? Both these guys are doing a pretty solid job just knocking out Neshoba, but there's always just another robot that can just go and score on this alliance. And this lead ends up becoming like ridiculous. As I think the way that we should be looking at these leads isn't from a perspective of how many points you have, but we should be looking at it like right now. Like, when I think about breaking this game down into sections, I think of, well, you have the auto section, and then you have the extra 10-second runoff, and that's the first portion of the game. And that's where you can really assess as a coach and see, okay, how are we doing in this game? Do we need to switch something up? Are we behind? Are we ahead? How are we looking, right? So you have that first 10 seconds after after auto ends to go assess that. And then you have the first 2 periods, right? You want to make sure that as a coach, as a spectator, whatever you're doing this for, you want to make sure that you're giving both alliances a chance to score. And now, after both alliances have a chance to score, this is the true lead. And don't get caught in by the fact that Alliance 1 was up by 12 points in their first scoring cycle because you haven't given Alliance 2 a chance to do it. Obviously, it might sound simple, but when you're behind the glass, it is really, really easy to get caught up by the number that's just there. So I think it's really important as a coach specifically to be making sure that you're aware of when to look at the score and when the score is actually meaningful to you. So like right now, if we take a look at this, that is a 32-point difference. And that's a 32-point difference that 6328 alone will have to make up, which just isn't really going to be possible, especially because 6328 does end up having issues here, even with a full hopper, and it's just not gonna end up being possible. I do like 4909's approach here, though, and I think there's a lot of merit to what they're doing, right? I think that this strategy as a whole, of even if we look at Alliance 1 as saying, okay, well, they're not really functioning that well, I think Alliance 2's strategy in this match is really good, where they're going around and they're sweeping all the close fuel to them, they're getting to their side. And then after the close fuel to them is gone, then they're going further into the Red Alliance's territory and stealing all the fuel from there and passing it back towards their side for the next scoring cycle. I think that there's definitely a difference in viewpoint of how you can say what you want to prioritize there. Do you think that maybe collecting the middle is more important because it's an easier thing for you to collect and it makes it easier for you to then score it and then go back to the middle because all the fuel is going to end up going to the middle anyways after it gets scored? Or do you want to go play denial? Right? There's a lot of different ways you can think about prioritization in this game. I think that both ways have merit to them. And either way, 4909 and 1768 do end up going with the method where they end up just taking all the fuel that there is, putting it on their side, and now they've set themselves up for a virtually perfect just scoring session. And we can see 6328 does end up trying to play defense, and then they get beached because that bump is so hard to deal with if there's fuel on the ground. And honestly, if you're playing against a robot that's pretty big as a defender, I think it might not be bad to just leave a bunch of fuel on the ground near you in front of the bumps, because this might end up happening where the robot's so big and goes over the bump that they end up getting beached, and now either the opposing alliance robot has to come and free them, which they're not really going to do because they're trying to set themselves up to at least try to get something in this match. Obviously, right, when you have 3 broken robots or 2 broken robots and a beach robot, it's not going to really be that effective on offense. But either way, you get the gist of, like, the fuel can definitely pose as a threat to anyone who's trying to go play defense against you. And we can see that because of the fact that they were able to stockpile all of this fuel on their side, obviously because of the fact that Alliance 1 was broken, but just because even though that happened, they were able to stockpile a lot of the fuel on their side of the field, and it allows them to go through from their scoring period at the end to going into the last 30 seconds where both alliances are allowed to score, and it goes with perfect ease, right? And they're able to easily just continue their cycle of scoring, and because they have so much fuel, they don't really have to go and hunt for anything at all, right? The collection that 1768 has right now, you see it took like 5 seconds, and they immediately have another full hopper. So either way, these guys put up a really high score. just because of the virtue of their strategy being quite good, even though Alliance 1 does obviously break, right? You can't play nearly as good defense or offense for that matter, and this game does matter points-wise when you do break, but either way, we do see that Alliance 2 ends up winning this second match, but Alliance 1 does end up fixing their robot, and at the end, does end up taking back the finals match 3, and so let's see how they do that. Alright, here is the finals match 3. Let's take a look at what goes on. So, immediately, we see that 9644 ends up coming in for Alliance 2, and they do have a center auto. I don't know why or what happened in Alliance 2 where 9644 wasn't able to play, or Persevere was able to play. Right? I'm not really sure about the specifics of that, but we do have 9644 playing in this match instead of the prior robot, and they do end up getting an auto, which means that the Blue Alliance now has 3 autos to work with rather than just 2. And we do see that I think that this is something that maybe Alliance 2 could have seen coming, maybe not seen coming, but because of the fact that 1768's pathing clears that really big hole on this side of just no fuel zone that ends up happening just by the way their path works, versus 4909 where they just push everything over, it does allow Lagerbots to get a pretty nice sweep back here. And we can see that look at their hopper, man. That thing is overflowing, and this entire auto period, they literally just spend with an overflowing hopper into the depot collection, and it's just so much fuel all getting poured in. At the end of auto, we do see that by one singular point, or 2 singular points rather, but either way, it's such a ridiculously low amount of fuel relative to the way that these teams are scoring, that Alliance 1 ends up coming out of auto with the victory, which I think is the main reason why they end up winning this match. So immediately we see that 1768 is immediately in, okay, we got to pass everything back to ourselves. Same thing with 4909, right? Just try to go collect as much fuel as you can before it's your scoring cycle. And now, because of the fact that you lost auto, you're now spending these 5 seconds of when you should be scoring, you're actually going to the middle and going to have to collect, and you're spending time. And 2342, to their credit, plays some really good defense here, right? They are just slamming around, messing up shots all over the place, denying 4909 from coming back, doing some great defense over here. But losing that auto, man, is going to be so brutal for any team, especially when you have a defense robot that looks like they know what they're doing really well and is completely screwing up your plans. I mean, you're going into this, we'll take a look in 20 seconds at what the score ends up being, but when you allow teams like 6328 and 2877 to work their entire strategy without having to be scared at all, it's just a plan for disaster. And you can see that at the end of this second period, when we actually want to take a look at the scores, this is a 50-point deficit, right? And I think a lot of that is the virtue of, 2342 plays some really good defense, right? I think they denied at least like 20 or 30 points from 4909 and 1768 combined. Could be more, just off of killing them by bumping into them when their stream is going. And because the robots aren't nearly as advanced as like a DCMP robot where the turret's going to automatically adjust the shooting as it moves around the field, right? That bump does allow them to just completely mess up all of the scoring, and all the fuel that they would have scored, like the 10 or so that they should have scored, doesn't go in. And also because of the fact they won auto, again, you give your Alliance 1 in this event the time to set up for their scoring cycle. You allow a robot like 6328 to set up for their giant hopper being filled going into their scoring cycle. Like it's just really, really hard to come back from. And obviously, we can see on this side, there is a lot of fuel to be collected, right? But 2342 is just doing a great job here, playing defense on 1768. They're keeping their bumpers flush. I love this from them, making sure that 1768 can't spin out. And as soon as they see 1768 get out of their defense by just wrapping around, they immediately go to jump 4909 and try to push them out of the way and deny as many points as possible. which I think is really good. I love when a robot or a drive team even is able to understand that, yes, maybe we've lost our advantage on defense, but instead of trying to chase and play suboptimal defense, we're going to just leave them, bail, and try to play more optimal defense, even though we have to spend our time getting to the other robot, and maybe it's not the target we'd hope to play against. But you could see 4909 just missed like 7 of their fuel because of the defense that 2342 is playing on them and is pushing them up against the wall and is doing a great job. And even though these robots would love to just be able to go across here and pick up all of that fuel and be scoring that, it's not possible because 2342 is just playing denial from the big hordes of fuel that are just sitting on the field, and it's just allowing their alliance to just get away with anything. I would like to point out that I do think 9644's defense is also really nice here. Alliance 2 does end up switching their strategy, right? They don't allow 6328 to just get away with filling their hopper for free, which is a really big problem. But because of 6328, they will find a way to score from other parts of the field. And one of the interesting locations they had here, if we back up 5 seconds, is that they actually have a consistent shot from against this trough. And because of the fact that their robot is so tall, they literally cannot be pushed off of this shot. I love this subtle design. I don't know if this is intentional. Obviously it's intentional, but I don't know if this was designed for. But the idea that you have made your robot bigger than the trough or trench, and are making it so you get a consistent shot every single time that cannot be defended, which is one of the biggest weaknesses of this type of robot, where obviously if you don't have a turret, defense is really, really hard to play into. I love this choice in shot location, and it just gives them like 20-ish cargo fuel just for free. And it also allows Liger bots to just go run around the entire time for free, because now 9644 isn't really defending them because they're kind of just focused on 6328, who has made a shot that is not defendable. To their credit, 9644 does do a good job here, right? Hitting 6328 does get called for a pin though, because this is a wall. If 6328 cannot go through this wall, if you are contacting them, trying to push them this way, that is a pin. I love this from 6328 so much. This is such a heads up shot location. I don't know if this was decided before this match started or not, because they didn't really run it in finals 1, but this is so well done from them, going into defense and pulling out this shot location. And then at the end of the match, obviously we talked about the advantage of being able to just score at the same time, or being able to set up for your own scoring. But when the alliance that didn't win auto does it, right? We can see that 1768 and 4909 were both on this side the entire time during the 30 seconds prior. And it just means that Alliance 1 isn't stopped enough or slowed enough to where it would make a difference. Or it doesn't give enough of a slowing down to Alliance 1 to where you can overcome that in the last 30 seconds. Because you have to spend that time setting up for your last 30-second cycle. Like, again, I think auto is going to be like one of the most important parts of this game. And if you can't win auto as an elimination alliance, you're going to really, really struggle and suffer and see the repercussions of losing auto every single playoff match. But at the end of the day, we do end up with a win by 6328 and 2877 and 2423, all who are very, very deserving teams. And even at the end, this does end up getting really, really close, right? It is just an 8-point difference, but the way the defense, as well as the really nice shot location from 6328, and being able to pull 9644 as a defender and leaving that open for 2877, I think that's what made all the difference. As well as, again, we talked about this auto number will matter a lot going into every single elims match. And if you can't win auto, I think it's going to be really, really hard for you to win a game. But that is what I took away from week 0s from the finals matches. There are a lot of interesting robot designs we saw. I would highly recommend you guys go back and look at some of the things that were happening. Off the top of my head, Outliers were running a double turret system. I think that's really, really cool because you end up getting the throughput where of like a double shooter system, but you also get the flexibility of the double turret. It solves a lot of issues, but obviously it's very complex. But that's a really cool robot to go look back at in a video. The 5000 ended up actually getting the first auto climb, and they did it in like 2 seconds or something. I think that they have an open alliance thread as well. I would highly recommend go check that out because I would love to see how they made their climb that fast for that L1 in auto. Because normally at the end of auto, you're kind of just left sitting there because you ran out of fuel in your hopper, and being able to just do that in like such a quick time, that's a really, really good point bonus. Yeah. Thank you guys for watching. I will be releasing 2 videos a week once comp season starts to roll around. One of them is going to be just matches that I thought were really interesting. And then I will also be asking for you guys to, again this year, give me some viewer matches to look at and see the strategies and how they played out, because I really loved doing that last year. I think it's really helpful, especially because you guys have so much more, like as a community, have so much more eyes than I do as one person, and I can only really focus on so many teams at once. So thank you guys so much for giving community matches last year, and I'm hopefully we're going to be able to get some this year as well. But either way, thank you guys so much for watching. I will come out with more content soon. Have a lovely day.